Good morning. So indeed, I'm afraid more about regulation this morning. The other big aspect really of the text, that Frances covered already, the so-called draft RTS, regulatory technical standards that we received from the EBA, European Banking Authority. I'll try to define the acronyms, by the way, as I go through. So EBA, European Banking Authority, based in London. We received that draft on the 23rd of February. It's been looked at by the European Commission, as Frances mentioned. We expect that the Commission today or tomorrow, will actually suggest amendments, i.e. things they don't like in the draft that they received from London, and therefore that the European Commission will send it back to London and say, please take another look at it, because we don't like some of the things that we see in there. On strong authentication, some of them, apparently, the rumor says, but more so on this topic that we'll cover now, the so-called topic of TPP access to the payment account, or X2A access to account, or AISPs, account information service providers, or PISPs, payment initiation service providers. So a lot of acronyms. I'm really trying to impress you here with all these acronyms, by the way. Hope I'm succeeding. There's only one I can't define, which is PSC, by the way. I'm not sure what that stands for. But, essentially, three things I'll try to cover this morning. I'll try to remind you what an AISP, an account information service provider, is, and what a PISP, a payment initiation service provider, is, to the extent you're not familiar with it. And then two, I'll try to give you the latest on the big saga on this topic of how the TPPs, the PISPs, the AISPs, how will these guys receive access to the payment account? I.e., is it going to be screen scraping, or is it not going to be screen scraping? We'll come on to that. There's a big boxing game currently going on there. And then if we have time, I'll try to cover essentially other questions on this topic, like, for example, what is a payment account to which these guys, the TPPs, will legally be allowed to get access to, and some thoughts on the authentication stuff, so really a link with what Francesca just talked about. So, first topic, what is a PISP, what is an AISP? First of all, is there anybody in the room who's not familiar at all with this whole thing of AISPs and PISPs, or are you all pretty comfortable? Okay, great. So I can be pretty brief then. A PISP provides a payment service, so they get access to the payment account, typically the current account, and they give instruction to push a payment from, say, my current account as a consumer. So I give consent to a PISP, say Zorfort, just to name an obvious one. I give consent to Zorfort to get access to my current account and to push a payment to pay somebody, for example, an online merchant. The intention from the Commission there is very clear, frankly. If I do that, if I go on a website, instead of clicking on the MasterCard logo or the Visa logo or the Amex logo or the PayPal logo, but I click on the Zorfort logo, that's one credit transfer more, and that's one card transaction less. Okay, so there's a very clear intent, I think, here that has been admitted by the Commission to try and diminish the share of card payments and increase the share of credit transfers, in particular in the online world. So this is competition versus cards. These guys provide a payment service, that's all fine. AISPs, account information service providers, they don't provide a payment service. So a lot of people are wondering, well, what the hell are they doing in an EU directive that talks about payments? Well, it's a good question, but it's too late, I'm afraid. So they're in there, and what these guys do, they basically collect data. So they aggregate data, for example, in an app. So let's assume you've got a bank account. We're in Belgium, so you've got a bank account with ING, and you've got a bank account with BNP. Well, instead of logging to two separate PC banking platforms to check how much money you've got on your current account, your savings account, etc., then these guys can aggregate it for you. You've got one app on your phone, and they collect the data from your BNP account and from your ING account. They aggregate it, and you can immediately see in one click on your phone how much money you've got at ING, how much money you've got at BNP on your various accounts. So they aggregate data. By the way, it can be from different banks, but it can also be from the same bank. There's a very well-known AISP in France called McInness, and actually 60% of the consumers using banking in France only bank with one bank, but they're still prepared to pay an annual fee to McInness for them to aggregate data from the unique bank that they're using, just because they like the interface better than the interface provided by their bank, which I thought was quite interesting. So PISP, they push a payment. AISPs, they aggregate data. So they're given new rights under the PSD2. That's from next year. It's from January of next year. So a PISP is given those rights, essentially to get access to the account in order to push a payment from the account. That's essentially what they're entitled to do. They don't touch the funds. So Zorfort never gets into possession of my funds, for example, as a consumer. they will need to identify themselves. So if I'm giving Zofort access to my bank account at BNP Paribas, for example, then Zofort needs to authenticate itself or to identify itself vis-a-vis BNP Paribas and say, hey, I'm Zofort. I'd like to push a payment to pay that online merchant, for example, from Scott's account. If they get access to data, they can only use data for the purposes of providing that service to me, that payment initiation service. But actually, when you think about it, actually, when you read the text, a PISP, so somebody like Zofort, legally is not entitled to any data. They're only entitled to get confirmation from my bank, BNP, I think I used in my example, to know that the payment, the credit transfer, in practice, has been initiated and that it's been well executed. But legally, Zofort is not allowed to get access to how much money I've got on my current account, how much money I've got left on my savings account, or how much I earn, or how much I pay every month for my mortgage. They're not entitled to that data, legally speaking. Although we'll see that based on the technology they're using today, they still get to see all that good stuff, but legally they're not entitled to it. So that's a PISP, payment initiation service provider. An AISP, an account aggregator, or an account information service provider, their job is to collect data. So obviously they are entitled to the data. Same thing, they need to identify themselves. So Bankin, for example, in France, need to authenticate themselves vis-a-vis BNP Paribas and say, hey, I'm Bankin. I've got the explicit consent from Scott to collect data from you, BNP, and from you, ING, so please give me the good stuff. They can only access the data from the payment accounts for which I've given my consent. So if I told Bankin, you can access data from my current account, for example, but you can't access data from my savings account, legally they would have to comply with that, so they can't see the stuff that I've not given them consent for. And the EBA in the draft RTS that was published in February was very clear actually as to what data they are entitled to see. They are as regards the payment account for which I've given my consent, they can see the same thing that I can see. The same data, the same information, okay? So transaction history, absolutely. If it's available to me as a consumer when I log in, if I can see that, Bankin can see that, transaction history. If it's available for the last 6 months or for the last 20 years, if I can see that as a consumer, Bankin can see it too. So that is the law, I guess. Any questions on the law as to what is an AISP, PISP, what they do? That was the easy bit, by the way. So, okay, good. Now let's move on to the technical stuff, I guess, which is really, the core of this issue and really the thing that is being lobbied really, really hard in Brussels at the moment and in London, which is, how will these guys get access to the payment account, technically? So today, they use a technology called screen scraping or web scraping, which is basically they ask me as a consumer to give them Zofort, PISP, or Bankin, an AISP. They ask me to give them my banking credentials, and they use those banking credentials to impersonificate me or personificate me, depending how you speak English. And so they log in as me. And so the bank thinks that Scott is logged into the platform to collect data, to push a payment, but actually it is Zofort as a PSP or it's Bankin as an AISP, which is raising a first issue because, as I just mentioned, the PSD2, they have to identify themselves. They have to somehow tell the bank, I'm Zofort or I'm Bankin. This is not happening today. Okay, so the bank thinks that it's me as a consumer. And then second, as I mentioned before, a PSP in principle gets to see nothing in terms of data, about how wealthy I am, etc. An AISP gets to see the same thing as me in relation to the accounts for which I've given my consent. But today, both Zofort as an PISP and Bankin as an AISP, those are just examples, by the way, to make it very clear, they get to see everything. So they get to see how much I earn, they get to see how much money I've got, they have visibility on my investments. If I can see that in the platform, they can see the investments that I have, shares, bonds, whatever. They can see transaction history like I do. They can see how much I pay to my bank in terms of my monthly payment for the mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. So they get to see everything because of the technology that is being used, which is that they pretend that they are me, and therefore they get to see everything. The EBA in London doesn't like that. So that's why we've got the chairman of the EBA on the 21st of February who said that technology, screen scraping, impersonification, it's finished. As from the day the RTSs will become applicable, to use a term of art, which is roughly 2019 at this stage, at some point in 2019, that screen scraping thing is finished. And 2 days later, the EBA then published the draft RTS that we talked about on the 23rd of Feb, saying, look, a bank has a choice. A bank either creates a so-called dedicated interface, typically referred to as an API, and I could define an acronym, but I'm not sure I can. Automated Programming Interface, I think. Thank you. So they create an API to give the stuff or to give access to a TPP, or, and that's because when it becomes, frankly, a little bit weird, or, the EBA said, you share with the TPP the same interface that you, the bank, you made available to the payment service user, to the consumer, i.e. me. But screen scraping is finished, that's from 2019. Frankly, I'm not sure what that sharing the interface offered by the bank to the payment service user means if it's not screen scraping. And actually, we'll come back to that, but that's the exact wording the Commission is using to protect screen scraping. So there's something odd there. But essentially, the bank liked this because the bank said, aha, I'm in control. Okay, and if I want to force these guys no longer to do screen scraping on my accounts or the accounts that I'm holding for the consumers, but to force them to go through a dedicated interface, an API, I can do that. So I'm in control as a bank. The draft RTS has some extra requirements in terms of what the interfaces should look like. For example, if it's an API that the bank is going to go for, and that was the intention of the banks under the draft RTS from London, from the EBA, then it's got to meet certain requirements. In particular, it's got to be the same level of availability and performance as the interface that the banks makes available to the consumer, i.e. it's got to be stable, it's got to work, the API, essentially, that's what we're saying. And if it doesn't work, the API, there needs to be contingency measures in the event of an unplanned availability / alternative options during the unplanned downtime. So there's got to be plan B, in other words, in case the API doesn't work. But that's what London wanted. So that's what the EBA wanted. So the banks can create APIs if they want to, force TPPs to go through API. They've got to work, and if they don't work, there's got to be a plan B. Okay? So the banks were happy because that allowed, through an API, that allows the bank to know that it is a PISP or an AISP that is knocking on the door of the payment account. And also that allowed the banks to only provide to the AISP in particular, the account aggregator, the data aggregator, only the data that is entitled to, and not data that he would not be entitled to. So the banks were happy, therefore the TPPs were not happy, and therefore the TPPs shifted a gear and increased their lobbying in Brussels and in London, for example, through this document here, a so-called manifesto. So you've got 70 or so TPPs who got together saying, look, this is outrageous, TPP has been around for so many years, web scraping has been around for so many years. It's working really well. We've got no fraud, no consumer complaints. So why the hell would you buy a technology that has proved that it's working? It's very efficient. And okay, it's true that through screen scraping, we may get more stuff than what we're entitled to, i.e. I may see Scott's investments, for example. I may see how much he pays for his mortgage. But that should be irrelevant, frankly. I'm not going to use the stuff that I'm not allowed to use anyway. So I can sort out the stuff that I need and the stuff that I'm legally allowed to use in terms of data and the stuff that, that I should not be seeing, but that I see anyway because of screen scraping. I will simply disregard it. So where's the problem? So massive lobbying in Brussels and in London. Therefore, the banks felt that potentially that lobbying could be effective, in particular with the European Commission, with the European Parliament. Therefore, the banks also had to shift up a gear for their counter-lobbying or their counter-boxing. So that's why you ended up with things like this video, for example, that you can watch at your leisure later if you're interested, but essentially warning consumers, do not give your credentials to a TPP. They're going to see plenty of things, and this should not be allowed. We are the bank. We should be protecting you. And if the regulator allows a TPP to do screen scraping, then we can't protect you, the consumer, because they will see all your data, which they should not be seeing. Essentially, that's what the video says. It's a bit longer than that. And it's got some really annoying music, but that's essentially what the video does. More papers. So the EBF, they put out a paper calling on the Commission to ban screen scraping completely. And then the more acronyms, ESBG, which I think is the European Savings Banks Group, and the EACB, which is the European Association of Cooperative Banks, also came up with their paper. So big boxing game going on here. And it looks like the TPPs are going to win. Because it looks like, at least at this stage, it's not the end of the game, but this current battle looks like they're going to win it because the rumor is that today or tomorrow, the Commission is going to release this, which we're not supposed to have, but everybody's got it, so I thought I would show it anyway. But so the Commission is going to release this, which is their proposed amendment to what came from London. So 23rd of Feb, London sent something to Brussels. This is what Brussels is probably going to send back to London. And what that thing says, you probably can't read it, but essentially what it says is, okay, the banks can go for a dedicated interface, an API that they offer to the TPP, but if the API is unavailable for 30 seconds, first thing, or if it does not operate at the same level of performance as the interface made available by the bank to the user, then the TPPs can use the stuff they're currently using, which is screen scraping. The banks are not too happy about this because essentially they're saying, look, you're going to continue to allow screen scraping because all the TPPs will say, I waited for 30 seconds, it didn't work, therefore I relied upon screen scraping. Or who is going to say, that the API did not operate at the same level of performance, and therefore I use screen scraping because I thought the performance was not so good. So the banks could say that TPPs will essentially regulate themselves and decide if and when they can use screen scraping, which de facto will mean screen scraping all the time. And therefore the banks are saying, look, we're not going to spend a fortune, 2 billion euros, or some of the numbers that I've heard, building nice APIs for these guys, if these guys are systematically going to do screen scraping. So forget APIs, we won't do them, and the screen scraping, we basically continue with screen scraping just the way we're doing today. Is that what you want, European regulator? But it looks like, we'll see what the Commission publishes later today or tomorrow, but it looks like this is what the Commission and the European Parliament, frankly, wants. So this is going to go back to London, and London will then, so the EBA, in London, and the EBA will have 6 weeks to look at it and say what they think about it. I would say, okay, well, we were wrong, you're right, Brussels, we'll change the text, or to stick to what they had proposed before and say, well, we really don't like screen scraping, we don't change our mind, and not change the text, which, knowing some of the guys at the EBA, can be expected. I either told the Commission to, that they're not going to move, and send it back to Brussels unchanged. And then the Commission will essentially do whatever they want with the text. I.e., they can amend the text if they want to, subject to scrutiny from the European Parliament and the European Council. And then at some point, when this boxing game will be over, then this thing will be approved. It will be published in something called the Official Journal of the EU. And 18 months later, so we're talking again probably anywhere between April 2019 and October, November 2019. So a lot of things may have changed in the meantime, by the way, but okay. Some point in 2019, this thing will go live. And I guess now it's essentially anybody's guess as to whether this thing will allow screen scraping or not. Is it going to be the Commission's text in the end, or is it going to be the London EBA February text? If I had to bet my money, I would bet more money on the stuff coming from Brussels than the stuff coming from London. But that's my money, and I don't have a lot of it anyway. So we'll see. We'll see. The important question, though, is what's going to happen between January, and here I see that I put October 2017. Actually, I should have put January 2018, really. Between January 2018, when PSD2 goes live, and the TPPs are legally allowed to get access to the account, and 2019, when the RTS, will become effective. What happens then? And so you've got some wording there, for the lawyers in the room that I pasted. But essentially speaking, with the Commission, screen scraping is allowed, basically, until the RTS go live in 2019. So if so as a bank, you're supposed to essentially continue to allow TPPs to use screen scraping between January of next year and 2019.